YouTube. And we'll start the show.
Okay.
And we're live. It is Monday, August 23rd, 5:05 p.m. Eastern Time. And it is hot and sticky, I think, everywhere that we are, which is all over the range of like the top of New York to the bottom of New York. I'm in Brooklyn. And hot and sticky everywhere else. We are not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to have Annette Gordon-Reed with us today to talk about her new book on Juneteenth. She is a professor of law, a professor of history at Harvard University. She has written a number of books, including The Hemingses of Monticello, which won the National Book Award and the Pulitzer Prize in the same year. You are a MacArthur Foundation Fellow, a Genius Award, as it's commonly known. There are a lot of things that are on your incredibly impressive bio, and I joked to my partner. He said, "Who's on the show today?" I go, like, one of our most impressive guests ever, and he was like, Barack Obama, and I was like, yeah, kind of like really close. Like,
yeah.
So we're just like, we're kind of like, in finding out more about you, here's just a weird intro. Like, your husband is a state Supreme Court judge
Yes, he
in
is.
New York? Yeah, my mom was a state Supreme Court judge for 26 years.
Uh-huh.
So, in Rochester.
Uh-huh.
So that is kind of a slightly kind of a cool coincidence. I didn't know that.
Yeah. We went to law school together, and
that's cute.
He's from California, and I brought him out here, and this was his decision to become to go and become a judge, which is what he wanted to do. But it's worked out very well for us.
Awesome. So do you mind kind of I guess it would be kind of fun. I was really interested in what it's like to teach history at a law school, what it's like to teach law, like have a legal background in a history department, but also you practiced law.
Mm-hmm.
You write. Obviously at both like legal scholarship level, but an accessible kind of trade level. Could you just like give us the like how you started all of this and how I couldn't even hack it at a law firm. That's why I'm in academia. So I just
Well, when I was growing up, I always thought that I would be a writer, and at some point I thought that might not be a practical thing to do, and I looked around at other things that interested me, and law interested me quite a bit. The idea of doing something where I might be able to help people, might be able to effectuate change in some fashion. I think a lot of people who go to law school have that in their minds. And I thought I would work for the government. That occurred to me. In law firms, I don't think I had heard of law firms, but I didn't really know what law firms did. And but I ended up going to a law firm, following my classmates. That was the thing that was done. And also there were the issue of student loans that you can pay back more quickly if you are working in a place that pays you well enough to do that. And so I came at this by a circuitous route. I'd always thought that I would be a lawyer, and I contented myself with saying, well, lawyers write, but I didn't realize that I'm writing things that other people wanted me to write. And what I wanted to do was to be able to deal with the topics that I wanted to deal with. So I practiced for enough time to be able to pay down some of the loans and to.
May I ask you what you practiced? What did you litigate? Were you a corporate lawyer?
Mm-hmm.
Like what?
Well, I went to a firm called Cahill Gordon in Wyandotte, and at Cahill then, I don't know how it is now, but they really were not divided into groups. So they let you early on experiment with different things. So I started out in litigation, but I also did some corporate work and a little bit of real estate. But I was predominantly litigation, and but I was only there for a little over 3 years, and I not till I switched off to the point where I had many real responsibilities. It was learning about what law was like and what law firm practice was like.
Did you like it?
Yes, but I wasn't interested enough in it to do it the way you have to do it.
Right.
When you're dealing with other people's problems, other people's money, other people's desires and so forth, you have to have a real focus. And I think to do it well, like anything, I mean, you have to have an affinity for it. And I just was not interested in doing that. So I worked hard enough to be an okay associate, but I was not, I was not partnership material because I wasn't going to make myself. I'm not saying they didn't think that, but I'm just saying I knew that I was not going to work the way you had to work in order to do that. And so, and plus, I wanted to have a family. And at the time, I was just sort of thinking that this isn't tenable. I'm sitting at the printers at 2 a.m. in the morning eating M&Ms and sushi. This is not the way to go. So I left, and I was counseled to a small city agency, the New York City Board of Correction, which was the oversight agency to the department. We were supposed to write minimum standards for the jail. Well, we did write minimum standards for the jails and deal with mental health issues and inmate grievances, those kinds of things. It was sort of not a prisoners' rights organization, but we were supposed to have this oversight function. But of course, we're this tiny agency with not enough money to do that. So it was a big mandate, but no money to carry it all out. So I did that for a couple of years, and I tried writing on the side. I did some book reviews for In These Times, and thought that I might be able to write. I took some writing classes at Columbia. I thought I might be able to do some of that on the side, but you can't do that when you're practicing law. And that's when I decided to go into academia. This is a long answer to your question, but it's a circuitous
this is exactly
route.
The answer I wanted.
It's a circuitous route to this point. I went to New York Law School. I had a husband by then and a child, 2 children, a baby, and I had to be in New York City. And they gave me a job, and I took it, and was supposed to be writing a law review article, and found that I didn't like that. I don't like that form. And I ended up writing my first book. So that's how I got into all of this, is just writing the book. And from there, the book was successful, and things just went from there. On the strength of that, I got an appointment in the history department at Rutgers Newark. And so I was between those 2 schools. New York Law School is a standalone law school. It's not part of a university. So I was in that history department, and I wrote a couple of other books, and then the Hemingses and Monticello came out, and then that's how I got to Harvard.
That's awesome. I also kind of,
by the way,
amazing.
That's a standard story, by the way. I mean, that's, you start out in a law firm, you do Board of Corrections, you go to academia, you go to Harvard, you win the Pulitzer. I mean, I've heard it so many times before. It's almost a cliche. Yeah.
I think that the part that I like so much about kind of your honesty and like that story is like that in every thing that you were doing and at each stage you were like fine with it, but you were recognizing the fact that it wasn't like making your heart sing in some capacity, and that it wasn't this wasn't like your best self because this wasn't matching exactly what you wanted to do. And I think that that's really awesome, and the fact that you still were, you got to academia and then still were like, no, I don't really want to write the standard law review essays. Like, this is not the best format for me, is kind of wonderful. Did you get your, so you started to write in history, and like, did you feel like did you have how did that kind of come about in terms of like having like a, just having all of the credentials and everything else? It's such a very austere world.
Well, I don't have a PhD. I just have the JD. Well, the first book was a book about evidence. It was about the use of evidence, and historians sort of gave me an entree by talking about, making references to law, saying if this were a court of law, Jefferson would be found not guilty. I mean, they would use burden of proof, all the kinds of things that invoking law to make their case stronger. And I thought, well, if you want to play that, I can play that game as a law professor. Let's walk through this, and let's look at the documents and look at the corroborating evidence and the lack of corroborating evidence and the standards that you're employing. So I felt really, really, I guess Mr. Jordan, Vernon Jordan always used to say, so I didn't have sense enough to know not to do this. Well, I think I didn't have sense enough to know that I was not supposed to do this. And as law professors, we kind of think we can do anything, right? We can make ourselves an expert in anything. But this really was, I think, very much what law professors do with students in class. It was perfect for this. There were competing stories about what happened at Monticello. There was evidence that people offered on one side and the other, and there was a way to look at it. And so I felt really, really comfortable. I was not 100% sure that Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings had children, but I was 100% sure that the way historians had looked at it was biased and was skewed with a thumb on the scale for one side over the other. So I felt I didn't have a publisher, and I didn't tell anybody I was writing this book except my husband. And I was supposed to be finishing this other law review article. So I just finished the book and, got a publisher, and things worked out. So it's not anything that there was no plan to this beyond my feeling that I had to write this book, because I thought it was a bigger question than just Tom and Sally. This is about slavery, and you're telling us that we don't have to listen to people who were enslaved. If they're saying something that makes you uncomfortable, you just brush it aside. And I just found that outrageous.
Did you know, did you know that you had a great topic, a great story? Or did the enormous success take you by surprise?
Oh, I thought I had a good story. I thought I had, because this was a topic that people were interested in. I knew people were interested in it. And the more research I did, in my own mind, I could see that there was a lot more to the story than I had imagined when I started to look at it. So I said this before, and it's absolutely true. I've never had more fun doing anything than that book. It was just, I started in January, and by April I had the first draft. And I, went down to Monticello, and I was working on it obsessively. The only thing that interfered were my kids. My poor husband was probably neglected in all of this, but I just, and it was classes and children and this book. And that's what I did until I got it done. So it was a great amount of fun. I really didn't stop to think as much about, well, what are the possible pitfalls of all of this? Because I was convinced that I was right about the double standard in the deployment of evidence.
Right.
I think I think it's great. One of the things that I also do a lot of is qualitative writing, in my legal scholarship. And I will start a problem, and I think it's interesting how you frame it. You have no idea what you're going to find out. In fact, which is so different than most legal scholarships, where you come at it with an argument and then find all of the stuff to back you up. It's the reverse process of deduction. And I think that, if you have a methodology and you think that you're going to apply the methodology correctly to a body of evidence, and no one has done that before, then of course you're going to reveal something that has been missed. So when you were writing this, did you put this into? How did you learn how to do it? How did you learn how to go down to basically to Monticello and look through how much were you looking at primary source documents and then looking at how they'd been interpreted and kind of questioning it? Were you trying to go and find things and reinterpret them after reading the secondary materials that had looked at them already? How were you how was it that you were going about this?
What was the kitchen sink? I did all of those. I looked at primary documents. I looked at secondary material. Again, this first book, I'm also writing about what other people have written. It's sort of judging the historiography. So that was a base to start. But as I began doing that, in order to make my argument stronger, I had to do other research outside of that. And that's how I found out, about what the kids were named, all these kinds of things that bolstered what it was I was saying, that Madison Hemings' recollections of his life could be corroborated. So how did I learn how to do it? I've read a lot. I've read a lot of books. I've read a lot of history books. The first serious history book I read as a teen, actually a little bit before as a teen, was a book called White Over Black by Winthrop Jordan. And that to me that said, this is how you do a history book. You make arguments, you sprinkle in, some witticisms occasionally. You have endnotes at the end. You have, when you say something, you have to have something to back that up. So it was really just, I learned how to do it by having read other history books and said, this is what you do. It was sort of on the job learning for all of the books in a way.
Do you mind if we, because I would love, do you mind if we pivot to Juneteenth?
Sure.
Yeah. Can you tell us about your new? It was just recently published, correct?
Yes.
It was
yeah.
In May. In May. Can you please tell us about that book? About
it's a very different book than I've done before. It is
right.
a memoir, a combination memoir and a history of Texas. I grew up in Texas, and my idea was to use my family story to tell the story of Texas. And I'd gotten the idea. I'd written an essay for the New Yorker about Juneteenth, the holiday Juneteenth, last year. And some months before then, I had done a review of 5 books about Texas for the New York Review of Books. So Texas was on my mind, and my editor, Bob Weil at Live Right, has been pressing me to do a book about Texas, but we were thinking about a big book about Texas. Well, during the pandemic, we were here, and you know what it was like. And were you here during that, or did you go away?
Yeah. Well, Kate went.
I went away.
You went away.
Yeah, I went away, but I was bunkered down here.
I was bunkered. Really, I was just hunkered down here too.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking about my parents, how they would have responded to this circumstance, and what they would have made of it. And I began to miss them, and I really wanted to try to do something that would put me in touch with them. And so when Bob talked about a book about Texas again, we came to the conclusion that it would be good for me I said, let's do something, but do something short. And so this is a pandemic book that was written during that time, over the summer, where I was here, only going out to Central Park to take exercise, or maybe to run to the store and get provisions or something like that. So, it's a book about race. It's about slavery and the history of Texas. I've spent a lot of time in the North. I came north to go to Dartmouth, and then I went to Harvard for law school, and we came to New York to live. And I've spent a lot of time explaining Texas to people. Folks are saying, so what's up with that? And I figured that this was an opportunity to try to do that through talking about my story.
Maybe you could just tell for people in the audience what the relationship between Juneteenth and Texas is.
Oh, okay.
Because obviously, they're obviously they're intimately connected. Right?
Well, Juneteenth commemorates June 19th, 1865, when Gordon Granger, the Union General Gordon Granger, came to Galveston, Texas, to take over Texas, the district, military district. The Confederate Army, the Army of the Trans-Mississippi, had surrendered June 2nd. And so then they were able to take over. So he goes to Texas and he makes the announcement that slavery is over in Texas on June 19th. And it was for many years called Emancipation Day, but then it became Juneteenth. And it's the day that Black Texans have celebrated really since from the very beginning, 156 years worth of celebrations of that day, of the end of slavery in Texas. So it has, the story. The book is not just about Juneteenth. It's about what happened before, how we came to the point of having to have Juneteenth, in other words, slavery, the institution of slavery, and then what happened afterwards, the retrenchment, the redemption period that brought in Jim Crow, and voter suppression and segregation, all those kinds of things. And my role at one point in striking a blow against that by integrating our town's schools when I was 6 years old. So it's a history and a memoir altogether.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I'm just very, I mean, and it came out not only, I mean, you call it a pandemic book because that might have been kind of a lot of how you were writing it, but of course, like, the entire country was going through a real reckoning with with race and its past. And I mean,
oh, that's definitely part of it as well.
Yes. And so, like, what was it like, kind of like, you were
You're right.
Yeah, you were writing the history. I mean, there's no one better to have written this. You kind of, like, in describing it for the New Yorker, kind of started the movement of popularizing it as an idea. Now, like, my university, like, now we have a national holiday. Like, I mean, it's kind of an incredible. It's been an incredibly, like, really, actually, a very short period in which this has kind of taken hold. But what was it like to write a book about it as that was happening?
Well, when I was writing the book, I wasn't really thinking about the holiday, that it might become a national holiday. I knew that was sort of in the background, and I make reference to that at the beginning of the book, that some people were really working on this very hard. But I didn't think that, I thought it might happen, but I didn't think it was going to happen this quickly, that it would happen during the time period of this, I'm on my book tour, for heaven's sakes. I didn't think that was going to happen. And then it was like a Wednesday, and the Senate accepted it. The person who had been the lone objector removed his objections, and then the Senate adopted it, and then the House. And the president, who I thought was overseas, I guess he had been overseas, but he came back, and I got an email inviting me to come down to the signing on the Thursday. So at like 9 o'clock in the morning, can you get down here by this afternoon? And so by 11 o'clock, I'm catching the 11 o'clock shuttle or whatever to Washington, and there later on in the East Room with all the people, Congressional Black Caucus, other people, Miss Opal Lee, who the 94-year-old who's been campaigning for this for many years, she was able to make it up for it as well. So this was a surprise to me. It was out of nowhere. I mean, I hadn't thought it would take place so quickly. And then and I do think that it had to do with the racial reckoning that we've been talking about, from George Floyd and Black Lives Matter and the aftermath of all of that. But I hadn't thought it was going to take place so quickly.
Yeah.
Is there a way in which I just wonder, given as we were saying, a reckoning that's obviously a partial reckoning with race, in the United States, that I would imagine, since you're such a well-known figure that and an expert on the history of race in America, that like it might be hard to write the book because people would be constantly asking you to comment on unfolding events. Did that happen? Because Lord knows, nope, that doesn't happen to me.
Well, yes, it did happen, and sometimes I say yes and I say no because I have a lot of stuff to do, and it's not really, it's part of my bailiwick, but not really. But that did happen, but it really didn't affect the writing of the book, because, as I said, I guarded my time pretty well, and there was just such an intense moment. You remember this? I mean, that March and April and May and June, it was just surreal. It was just surreal. It was
completely surreal. It's actually weird to think about it. Yeah.
I mean, they're like a couple of blocks away, like in Union Square, they were burning cars, and we were like, and I would say to my kids, don't go out, because they're like, I can smell the smoke, and they were like, of course they were gonna go out, and of course I went out too because I had to see it. But it was so.
We went for walks in the park and saw all of the tents in Central Park that had been put up for the overflow of people
Oh,
from
right.
the
Yeah.
hospitals and so forth. So it was a very, very weird time. And I did get, but in the midst of all of that, we were still talking about the question of race and so forth. And I did get inquiries about that, but I fended a good number of those things off.
Yeah.
It took very
Did
much
you,
time at all.
one last question, because um, I managed to write a book during the pandemic, though not a good one. I think that I found it awfully difficult to do. I felt myself so distracted. I felt like without the ability to talk to colleagues about what I was doing, that I just felt like intellectually stale. Did you feel that way at all, or was it, or you're just able to like move forward?
Well, I think I don't. What was your book about?
My book was about Juneteenth. No, my book was about it was on hacking, and so
Well, I mean, I think because this was personal, this was,
um,
I'm sort of getting in touch with, I was getting in touch with myself, getting in touch with my parents and my family, reminiscing about that. There was sort of a
mm,
nostalgia to it. I think it was probably easier for me because it was very personal. And
Sounds almost therapeutic in a way.
yeah,
mm,
in a way it could have been. Yeah, I think it
Yeah.
probably was. I responded to that way. And I'm writing about Texas, something that I had been thinking about. You remember I mentioned the essay that I'd done before and the book reviews. So I think I had an easier task than you did
yeah,
in the midst of all of
that
this.
yeah, thank you. You had a much easier task than me. I think we all agree with that.
Let
Um,
us know, Scott, when they make your book a national holiday. So, but we should pivot because we both were kind of curious about, as all this was happening, everything else that's been going on. There has been this that we've both Scott and I have been dealing with in the classroom and otherwise. And you know from Twitter, I teach property law, and I teach property law with a critical race theory lens. And when I first started out, it was actually like, I think that my students were just like very confused why we were talking about race so much in the context of a 1L class and in the context of property. And I got better at explaining kind of like how that was happening, and explicitly at like framing at the very beginning of my class. I like drawing attention to critical race theory and framing that, and then like moving on. And now I am actually quite nervous because of like the events of the last year, that these like out of nowhere this term has become so politicized, and like basically kind of being met from conservative factions in my class and other types of things with kind of with backlash for teaching with this kind of lens, which I'm obviously not going to give up, and obviously I don't even think I could give up if I tried, in like kind of how I understand like the events of property, and thinking about the law. And so I'm just kind of curious like what that's been like for you and how you've been thinking about it. And I mean, you probably don't teach property anymore. In fact, I think my friend Molly Brady is teaching property.
Yes. She's the property maven.
Yeah, she is. She's like, yeah, she's wonderful.
Yeah. No, when I came to Harvard, I dropped 1L class. I dropped the property, and I do legal profession. That is my my service course, and that's typically upper classmen. You know, I I haven't had the chance to think about it because I talk about race. I teach American legal history. I teach legal profession and criminal procedure, for heaven's sakes. Um, you know, it's all about race. It's all about race all the time. And so I guess it's critical race theory that I'm doing, but I'm more talking about race. Now, of course, that doesn't answer the question that you're asking, because what has happened is that anything that's about race has been labeled critical race theory. It doesn't matter what it is.
It's like being in the upside down world or something.
Yeah,
it's just
critical.
like crazy. Like,
Yeah, critical race theorists all talk about race, but all people who talk about race are not critical race theorists.
yes.
And so, I don't. There's no way for me to talk about criminal procedure without talking about race. It is. So there it is. I mean, it's in the cases, it's the students bring it up, I bring it up, it's right there in your face. Legal profession, there are sections about blacks in the profession and so forth, and women, and we do those kinds of things, but Crim Pro is enormously volatile on that subject, and you just have to talk about it. But it's a culture war diversion, I mean, to sort of rouse people, and keep their minds off of other things. It's a distraction because, they're not teaching critical race. I can't imagine anybody's really teaching critical race theory, K through 12. They're just talking about race, and they're talking about history, the stuff that happened. I saw someone complaining about the biography of Ruby Bridges. There's sort of a child's biography of her, and they were complaining because there's a page where there are white people who are yelling at her when she's going into school, except that happened. I mean,
it's not critical race theory, it's critical race practice, right?
It's like, oh my God. It's like,
it's like, what, it is upside down. What are you going to pretend that this didn't happen? I mean, there was a teacher who taught her, it was a white person who taught her, and why can't that be the representative? It's almost as if you're talking about our people here, the ones who are out there screaming. It's like, no. You want to be like the person who helped her. You want your children to identify with her, not those people. But it's,
yeah.
I
mean, how do you teach Johnson v Macintosh, which is like this very old case from like one of the first cases in property and in constitutional law, which is like basically the United States drawing the lines about what they're going to recognize under the law as like a conveyance of a property and who gets to convey property. And they say basically Native Americans don't get to convey property. Yeah. This earlier conveyance doesn't count for anything, because we're not, and how do you draw the line around the notion of discovery of property or like anything without talking about that?
But you have to talk about it. Marshall talks about it. Marshall says, the pretensions of these people that they felt that they were better, and that their possession of the land was real, and their Native Americans' possession was not real. So even if you do that's the thing about, the crazy thing about all of this is is that it's right there in the primary source.
Exactly.
Yeah. Like that we're making this up, that we've all of a sudden started talking about race. But they talked about race a lot in the 18th century, and did a lot of stuff about it. 18th and 19th century. Just look at the documents. It's there.
Yeah.
Right, the Chief Justice Marshall was very woke. I mean, what's amazing is that he calls the Supreme Court, which he's the Chief Justice, the court of the conqueror.
Yeah.
Like that's the phrase, the court of the conqueror. I mean, like it's like there. Mm-hmm. This is not subtext. It's just
not
text.
At all. I mean, I usually start when I taught property. That's the case that I started with. And he's upfront about it and open about all of it and explains all of this. So you have to deal with it. These people were not hiding this kind of the stuff. Yeah. It's right there.
I show an Eddie Izzard sketch with Eddie Izzard and drag talking about basically how the British just walked places and stuck flags and things, and then decided that they that it was theirs, that they had discovered India, and India's like, there's a million of us, we're right here.
And that's when history begins. When they show up, that's when history begins.
He was like, the cunning use of flags. Yeah, exactly. So it's exactly that.
But don't you think that this is a blessing in disguise, though? That it there's the Streisand effect. Now everyone 18-year-old kids, 21-year-old kids who go to law school or in undergraduate, they want to learn about critical race theory, whereas before it had been somewhat of a niche subject.
Oh yeah,
and so
you make it interesting.
It's like, oh, this is dangerous. Maybe I should learn about it.
I want to learn about it. I think it's definitely going to have that effect. The Streisand effect is real, and I think, because it makes it irresistible to people. And as we were saying, because this is so present in the documents already, it's not like the teacher is having to drag stuff into it. It's right there. it's easy, it's low hanging fruit in a lot of ways.
I'm really curious if there is going to be, if you're like, I think that it would be so interesting to have a history of critical race theory, like about how it kind of came about and how it was like written about, and which I'm actually, like, as I say that, I'm like, there might be one already, but I haven't looked at it. But that kind of puts it in context of this.
Yeah. Well, one of the people who started this, Kim Crenshaw, was my classmate. We were in the same section.
Oh, wow.
Oh, really?
And, yeah. And between her and Derek Bell, and I know I've seen articles that talk about the history of this, but maybe it's time for Kim or someone else to, I know she's commented on it recently, for her to do something about pulling all of this together so people can actually know what it is, for one thing, and what it is not, and talk about how it's relevant.
Yeah,
it's still important.
Can I just say, I don't. What do you think critical race theory is? Like, well, so yeah.
No, you're going to say something else.
No, I was just going to say, like, when somebody said, like, anything that has to do with critical race theory, you must say, no. But what would you say it is?
I think it's for me, it's a way of looking at law, investigating the way in which law reproduces hierarchies of race, even when there are laws that supposedly solve a problem involving race. It tends to replicate itself. And so it's it's looking at this thing in a systemic way. Now, a lot of the stuff that's happening in schools now, the sort of anti-racism curriculum, is actually somewhat at odds with that, because they believe that that individual people, that you can take individual people and change them, and then things will get better. And the critical race theory people think that the system has to be, it's not about individuals, that it's a systemic problem, and you have to attack the problem systemically itself. So to my mind, it's, and I guess even people who've done anti-racism, people that I've talked about about it, say that the difference is that some people think that this could be done on a person by person basis, and that's not their take on it at all. And so I think it grows out of critical legal studies with the crits, who were, I guess, they were powerful when I was in law school back in the dark ages in the 1980s, and the critical race theory people moved away from, brought those ideas to.
They're an offshoot of
of all of that.
Which is, I've heard someone saying, they were like, why do they, like, what, when they name these things, like, why did they name it critical? That just automatically put someone on their back foot. I'm like, it has nothing to do with with that. It's like, because it's a subset of this other thing. It just was like,
right.
But my torts professor Duncan Kennedy and my legal history people, they had that. They were part of that, and then there's Kim and Derek Bell and
Patricia Williams.
Patricia Williams, Pat Williams, and so forth.
Yeah, Cheryl Harris,
Delgado.
Graham Dalton.
Okay, so Chris has a great question for us. Hi, Chris. Great to see you.
Hi, good to see you. Hi. Hi, Professor. So my question is, how do you navigate the divide between academic and so-called popular history? And in this respect, I'm thinking of the so-called Hamilton effect of
the Hamilton effect.
Giving you like a story that you thought you knew, but in a new way to reach a new audience.
Well, I mean, I guess I handle it because, as I said, I always thought of myself as a writer. That has always been my primary identification. And so it never occurred to me when I became an academic that I would be writing just to my colleagues or writing to an academic audience. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about how to present things, thinking about the style of writing as a stylistic matter, as a way of becoming as clear as I possibly can be, and to take complex questions and explain them in as clear a fashion as possible. So I get at it by not well, thinking that I want to write to as wide an audience as I possibly can, and take ideas that are scholarly, I think, and can be difficult, but to do them in a way that make them accessible to everybody, because that's what I wanted to do. I mean, as a scholar of color, I guess. I don't like that phrase, but that's the only thing I can think of at this moment. As a Black person, or even I don't even like that, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I felt a responsibility, since there are so few of us in this arena, to make my writing, to make what it is that I'm communicating as clear as possible. And to as large a number of people. So while I've got the microphone, while I've got the platform to do it, so that as many people can understand this as possible. So that's how to me, it was never, I guess what I'm getting at, it was never a matter of trying to bridge anything. It was always going to be that. I was always going to write this way. I was always going to pay attention to style and pay attention to presentation as much, along with ideas. Ideas are going to be important, but I think that even really complicated ideas can be expressed in an accessible fashion, and that's what I tried to do.
Yeah, I think so. Can we expect a musical on Juneteenth? Is that what you're telling us? Like,
no. No.
Will you star in it?
Lin has kept cornered the market on that. Anything that anybody does now will be seen as, will be a copycat, will be a poor copycat to that.
Yeah,
that's
that
why
was a lightning strike, I think.
Yeah, I know.
I think that's right.
He ruined Legality, the musical, for me. I mean, whatever.
You could try something else, maybe.
Yeah, you can still do the children's book series, Scott.
Interpretive dance. Why not?
You know what? Never dare me. Because I will. Really I will do that. Yeah.
Richard.
Hello. So I am a big fan of your Twitter feed, and also, and I've really enjoyed reading your little stories about returning to the piano. That's
I love those too.
That's been quite fun to watch and to read.
Richard is a musicologist.
Oh, cool.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So, now my question actually has to do with how you think about history, about historical memory, and how you see it and your work having an effect on public policy.
Well, I think we're supposed to say that history is required for public policy. I think that it's something that is a useful guide, but you're always cognizant of the fact that you live in different times. I mean, history may impart lessons, but you don't want people taking that too seriously, so that they don't pay attention to the differences in the moment that we're in. I mean, it's a guidepost. It's something to think about, to be aware of. I mean, I suppose when somebody says Afghanistan is the graveyard of empires, that doesn't mean that you can't try. It doesn't mean that you have to have a sense of possibilities and what's probable and what's not probable based upon history, but you don't want to be tethered to that. So it's a delicate balance. I mean, people ask me quite often about this, and should historians be like economists, giving like a council of historians? And I don't really think so. I don't. I want people to be cognizant of history and to have it in their mind, but I don't think it's a matter of something that you can put a one-on-one correlation between what happened in the past and what happened today. It's just something to be kept in mind.
Do you notice that do you see a difference between the way history is taught in a history department versus how history is taught in the law school?
Well, my setup is that I teach in the law school and teach in the history department. I teach straight history courses, and I teach straight law school courses. And sometimes I blend, like I'm teaching American legal history this semester, and I will blend all kinds of students in that particular class. You know, not really, because most of the people that I know, my legal history professor, Morton Horowitz, was a historian and, you know, went to law school as well. So I think it's pretty similar. You know, what's different is the way the students sometimes respond to things.
I was going to ask that. Yeah. How do you grade? like you must get like, I mean, like, no, seriously, because law students write, like, kind of are taught to kind of write in one way, and
for the exams, they're fantastic writers here. I should say that. I mean, I'm just so impressed by our students. I think the biggest difference is in the classroom discussions. In a lot of ways, I think law students see things very instrumentally. They are looking for the thing in history that can help them answer the question, like the question before. What can I take from this that can help me make an argument? And I don't think that history graduate students, maybe not the undergrads, but the graduate students don't do that as much, I would say. They're not as instrumentalist in the way they approach the questions.
Well, isn't it also considered somewhat verboten to do that? Isn't that like to commit the sin of either presentism or kind of having a normative take on something, or some kind of it kind of contaminates the analysis? Isn't that? I mean, isn't that part of the thought?
Well, yeah, it is for historians. Yes, that is that. But but the law students are going into a profession where judges and lawyers and other people say constitutional law. They use con law. You know, they will be looking to precedent. They will be looking to the past. It's not quite the same as doing history, but they have a different relationship. They have a particular relationship to the past. And they have to make art. They know if they're judges, and they're judges when they're writing, if they're clerks writing opinions for them, will want to look to history to find some answers. And so that looking for a usable past, as they say, is something that lawyers do, and historians hate that. You know, call it law office history, and you're not really doing history, but it's the nature of the profession requires you to look in the past. There's a value in that, but there's also a value in taking the past on its own terms. Yeah. And not seeing it just as a something in our toolkit that we can pull out for our own present day purposes. Because because the people are so different. You know, some things are similar, but some things are like way different than our situation.
Yeah, I can't imagine what a treat it must be, to be perfectly honest, to have a blend of like Harvard, like young historians, like, or the undergraduate or graduate level, and then like law students kind of in a class. It just seems like it would be kind of just a fascinating.
It is.
Yeah,
and
seems like a really
love
great
reading the exams. You know, I have to say, I can't always
you can't tell.
No, I mean these are anonymous. I don't know who these people are. I can't always tell who is the law person and who is the history person. But certainly in the discussions, because they go back and they look at past exams and they figure out how they're supposed to respond. And so they're smart kids, so they all figure out what it is, how they're supposed to present things. So it's not,
right.
They've been tipped off to some degree, but it is fun to have the discussions with people who are approaching these things in a very different way, very often.
Let's see if we can get Daniel here. Daniel, I thought we're going to kind of switch gears, but in questions. But why don't you close out with your question?
So I guess the motivating thought behind my question is that before Trump's election, I did not believe someone that acted like George Wallace in his racial demagoguery would win a presidential election, especially after the civil rights movement. Of course, there's been lots of racial dog whistles and campaigns by Republicans since the civil rights movement, but it surprised me that Trump was able to win given his open racism. I'm wondering whether it surprised you and that he was able to win with such open, blatant racism.
No, not really, because I think the hatred for Hillary Clinton and the concern about women, a woman as president, which I think is in the minds of a lot of people who might not even admit it to say it, were strong enough. I mean, I always thought that it was possible that he would be president, that he could be president. And, you know, the sort of hostility towards her, you know, made me think that it was possible that she would lose. I mean, it's a big deal. I mean, for a lot of people, it's a big deal to have a woman as the president of the as a president. The presidential systems don't do well. Women can be prime minister, but to win in a countrywide presidential election is a tough thing to do. So I wasn't surprised by that. And I also know that there were lots, because I grew up in Texas, that there are a lot of people who felt the way that many Trump, you know, supporters felt, and understanding that there's often a backlash after there's an advance for blacks in the, you know, with the election of Barack Obama. This seemed something that was plausible to me. I didn't think it was likely, but it was certainly plausible to me that he could have. I wasn't shocked that he won.
So I was a modern American history major at Brown, and so I had Gordon Wood and Seth Rockman and a couple other people that were kind of teaching me. And I remember having a debate with, like, in one of my, like, Civil War to read through Reconstruction classes that was, you know, well, it was actually kind of Civil War through actually the ERA. So, like, it was that era, it was a huge swath. And the argument being that my professor put forward was that this was an era and that all of U.S. history, like the dominant narrative, was one of race. And I kind of pushed back in that, like, I said, well, but isn't there a global, kind of a absolutely global narrative of gender? Like, you can go to any society, and whether it's mono-racist or not, like, you have some type of hierarchical structure based on gender. And so isn't that maybe some type of order of like approach that we should take? And it's interesting because it's interesting that you say that, because we bind them up together, I think, in social movements, but they do strike at very different intuitions, I think, historically, and how they've played out. But you bring up the Hillary Clinton thing, and I completely agree that like was part of the reason that someone could be so racist. But that kind of intersectionality in the problem is just not really well explored.
Well, because people don't see themselves as racist,
right?
They see themselves as racist, but they could say, you know, for all kinds of reasons, a strong country cannot have a woman as president. I mean, you know, after the Civil War, they gave black men the vote, not white women. You know, just think about that. I mean, it's like. So,
oh no, I know.
Yeah. I mean, I know.
I ended up writing my thesis on the ERA. Yeah. And I grew up in Rochester, New York, and like, so that was like this weird confluence of like Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony, and I like was always kind of aware of that tension and kind of like in history.
And so, you know, Obama is one thing. Some people always ask me, said, well, a number, but not always, but a few people ask me, you know, who would Jefferson be the most upset about as president, more upset about, Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton? And I think it was Hillary Clinton.
Oh yeah,
easily by now.
Like, yeah,
because to him that would have been unnatural. That this is, I mean, he would have understood that, you know, he saw black men as the natural leaders of. When he talked about black people, it was always reference to black men, not women. We're not in that thing. So, but he would have thought that was really, really a problem. The gender part of it, and if all it took was just enough people to be voting on that basis to to tip the balance in these places. We're talking thousands of votes, a difference in key places that tip the balance. So I think that the hatred, and she is a lightning rod. The Clintons are a lightning rod.
Yeah, they have
for people.
They have their own.
They have their own
crazy
thing. Yeah. Cloud that goes over them that people just. And that's going to be an interesting thing for historians in the future to figure out what exactly is that about. I understand disliking people, but the level of things that they've been accused of, and what
and kind of the weird power they ended up wielding in the president, in not the presidency, the weird power they ended up wielding in the party.
Yeah.
Even after his impeachment and his kind of fall from grace, that they still ended up having, and it was just kind of insane.
Yeah.
Scott?
I was just going to ask, because I've brought this up before on the show, but I'm really looking forward to getting back to teaching, which is normally not the case when, you want more and more time for writing. But I'm sick of 18 months of being in my house. Are you looking forward to getting back to teaching?
I'm looking forward to it. I'm not looking forward to wearing a mask and talking into a microphone.
It sucks. It really sucks. Sorry, I taught all last semester, and I was masked. The worst part is actually that they are masked.
That's what I was going to say.
Because you can't hear them.
I'm not going to be able to hear them.
You can't hear them. I had a giant auditorium. What do you say?
Do you have microphones?
Yeah.
The students have microphones.
No, the students didn't have microphones.
No,
I had a
microphone.
microphone. Yeah, they're doing it better at Harvard. I know because Molly's been talking to me about it. But and she was never in person last year, and so she was doing all online, and I was doing
we were doing it all online. I was online as well, and I sort of developed a whole thing. I had teaching fellows and all kinds of stuff, but they'll be different now. I mean, I could, but there's no point for my legal history class is not going to be really big enough, I think, for that. But
yeah.
But I mean, to go into the office and to see colleagues and
go to lunch with colleagues. We go to the dining hall. We have a dining hall that we go to, and faculty workshops Monday and Thursday, and all that kind of stuff will be good.
I would say, here's the question: would you trade 3 months, the next, you don't have to teach, you could just write for this semester, or you go back and you do your teaching? Which would you pick?
I'd go back and do the teaching.
Me too.
I mean, I actually, I wrote all of my books. I've never had really a sabbatical.
You're making us look bad.
You're making us all look bad. I've written all of my books. I work better when I have a lot of stuff to do.
Can we edit this out?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll clip this off. Well, don't worry. We're going to cut the last 3 minutes. I don't want my dean to see this.
You've just gone. I'm sorry. You've just gone off the reservation. I mean, this is not something that. I mean,
also because we're doing I'm doing qualitative research too, and I can't do all of the interviews and everything that I'm doing with teaching. I mean, I try, but I lose my mind and I don't sleep very much. Mm-hmm, I don't know how you did it with kids. I have no idea. Mm-hmm. That's crazy. Mm-hmm. You're superhuman.
I have my husband is I have a good husband, and we're like a tag team, with them. And I did a lot of stuff when they went to sleep. And, I wrote around them and researched around them as well. No, but I tend to be a slug when I don't have other things, when I don't have a schedule otherwise. And it forces me to be efficient. So actually, I've gotten much more done when I have been teaching than when I had a Radcliffe professorship. That was a 5-year thing. So I could have 4 semesters off, essentially. And instead of taking them together, I alternated. And I got way more done when I was teaching than when on my off semesters.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
you goof off. You'll say, "Oh, okay, I have another month to go," and before you know it, it's over.
no, that's right.
That
That's
is
right. Don't worry, Annette. No, we're cutting this out so nobody will ever hear it. So.
Seriously. Oh my gosh. We have to end, but this was so wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for hanging out with us.
Oh,
This
it's
was
great.
fun.
Lots of
I think that I was just so happy to hear your kind of origin story and to hear about like kind of how you came to writing. That was so helpful, like for me personally. And then I think for the audience, I just got a bunch of texts and emails that people were like loving it. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, thank you for inviting me. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We need to put more puns in.
Yeah.
What?
We were told that you love puns.
Oh.
I also love puns, but they just didn't
Who
like
told
show
you
up.
that? Adam Rothman?
No.
Seth
Oh
Cochran?
yeah. No. I like no. So yeah. Someone. People that follow you on Twitter know that you love puns. So.
Okay.
Yeah. I guess. I know.
Okay. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for inviting me. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah. We will be back 22 hours and 54 minutes from now. And until then, Scott.
We can't have fun anymore. I'm drawing a blank.
But in lieu of fun.
But in lieu of fun,
we have
we have
the upcoming Legality national holiday.
we have Legality, the musical. I would just say what I said to Kate right before you got on. I said, she's done so much. Where do we even start? This was so perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.